This morning, as we continue in our summer series on the book of Revelation, I want to begin by simply stating the obvious. Now, I hope this does not surprise you or shock you. There is no perfect church. Do you believe that? There is no perfect church. And notice that's in capitals. No perfect church. Now, when you think about that, think about some of the churches that you've heard of or know of. There's some good churches. There's some not good churches, and there's some really bad churches. It's funny, there is a kind of a pipeline of ministers that ministers use. I remember talking to a young youth minister not too long ago, and he was saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this church has called me to possibly be their youth minister." I knew through the grapevine that this church had a habit of chewing up youth ministers about every year and a half and spitting them out and throwing them to the curb. And I said, before you do that, I think you need to talk to some people. There's a saying that Ed Skidmore taught me. He said, some churches are just preacher-killing churches. All in all, I think most churches are pretty good. I think we're pretty good. I don't think we're a bad church. I don't think we're... And one of the other things I've noticed is good, bad, and ugly doesn't necessarily mean anything about the size of the church. But there are no perfect churches. In fact, I heard one time that someone say, if you ever find the perfect church, please don't go there because you'll mess it up. Why does God allow imperfection in his churches? You ever wonder? Why would God allow imperfect in his church? I think it's because of love. Because he wants people like me and you in his church. And I'm not going to speak for you, I'll speak for myself. I'm not perfect. Boy, you missed it about 8:20 when I wanted to throw that computer through a window. Oh, I was frustrated. And then my lovely wife made the comment, "Hey, on the computer, do you think you could?" And I just looked at her like, you got to be kidding me. And my eldest kept me cool and said, please don't throw that through the window. We're not perfect, but we're loved. And this is actually going someplace because in our series on Revelation, we're now going to look at the church. And in the church, we're going to look at chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation at the 7 letters to the 7 churches. Now, I realize that many times you can look at the 7 chapters of the 7 verses and you could think to yourself, this could be 7 weeks. It very well could. But you know what I really know about this? We're going to do it we're going to take what I'm going to call a macro look at the 7 letters. But before we do that, I need you to put on your apocalyptic glasses for me. The lenses that we can look at so we can understand the message and the relevant terms and the numerology. Now, we learned a couple of weeks ago that the number 7 refers to completeness, correct? You remember that? So, the 7 letters to the 7 churches seems to refer to the complete letter to the whole church. I just used whole instead of complete because it seems redundant and repetitive and saying the same thing again and again. So in these 2 chapters, we have God looking at the whole church and Jesus speaking to us. Now, in these specific 7 letters, there is a specific formula that Jesus uses, that he gives to John as he dictates these letters. It's a 3-fold or 3-part formula. The first part is going to refer back to chapter 1 in his description of Jesus. He begins with this image that's going to refer back to the vision of the Son of Man. And it seems to be authenticating the letter. It's Jesus' signature, if you will, to the letter. In other words, John is saying, look, this is the one who's telling me this. This is Jesus' signature. These are his words. So that's the first part of the letter. The second part of the formula is this. It's a description of the church. Now, within this church, within this description, you're going to have the good, the bad, and the ugly. In fact, there is only one church that he doesn't find any fault with. And it seems to be interesting that is the church going through the strictest persecution. But what we learn from this, and what we have to acknowledge, is this. Jesus knows us. He's omniscient. He knows it all. He knows the good, the bad, and the ugly about his church. I'm amazed how some people think they can hide things from God. It reminds me of the toddler. You ever play peekaboo with the toddler? I can't see you. And you can't see me, right? Because I can't see you. Why do we do that with God? Because we're emotional 3-year-olds? Spiritual 3-year-olds? But Jesus, in these letters, has some pretty pointed things to say to the church. And they're kind of disturbing. And you know what disturbs me the most about them? The things that he says? Because I recognize myself in them. And I look and say, ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah, that could, yeah, oh, yeah. Now, I realize there's one part where it talks about you've given in to you've accepted the teachings of the Nicolaitans, and the neat thing about all the commentaries you read, nobody really knows what the teaching of the Nicolaitans was, other than it died out. I love this one. I have this one commentary. It's a very detailed, very explicit commentary, and it says this about the Nicolaitans. Apparently, they were followers of one named Nicholas. There you go. And that's the deepest I could find. Third part of the formula is this. It is a reward for those who are victorious. A reward for those who do what they were supposed to do. I came across this quote, and I got to show it to you. It was in that real deep commentary. It says this: victory is an important theme throughout the book of Revelation. Since Christ triumphed over sin and death, we too shall triumph in the end, no matter how difficult things might be at the moment. Anybody have difficult moments in life? But you know what? The one thing that we learn, but the thing that we need to understand is, again, and I'm going to say this throughout the book of Revelation, in the end we win. And even though we're going through difficult times, we win. So I want us to look at, and the way I view these 7 letters, the way I view the entire book of Revelation, is a book or a letter or letters of encouragement. He is trying to encourage us. It's like this. Have you seen the cartoon of the guy riding the horse? And to get the horse where he wants to go, he's got a stick in his hand that has a carrot dangling. Okay? And then there's the other rider. Instead of the carrot's got that stick and he's beating the horse. 2 approaches. The carrot and the stick. This morning, I want us to look at the carrot. And maybe it's just me, and maybe it's Father's Day, and me being a dad, but this is the way I look at it. I really don't need people telling me what I do badly and where I miss the mark. Trust me, I know. Okay? I got a bad temper. I do. I blow up. Now, the neat thing about my bad temper is I blow up, then it's over. But I do blow up. Okay? I know what I do badly. I have a hard, sometimes I struggle. It's like, instead of the stick, can I have a little bit of carrot? Can I at least see the carrot? As we look at these 7 letters today, just because it's Father's Day, just because, well, I wrote the sermon and I got to choose, I want to look at the carrot. So I want to look at this third section, or the third part of the formula. Now, Jesus also does something. You know how John, when he's writing this, there's a lot of reference back to the Old Testament? There's this phrase that he's going to use over and over again, which I love. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, we just think, oh, that's kind of a cute, neat little formula. David, you want to go back one? Thanks. And as we do this, what I want you to understand is that phrase, and listen to what the Spirit says, is going back to apocalyptic literature in the Old Testament, specifically Ezekiel, Isaiah, and parts of Jeremiah. Listen to what the Lord has to say. Now, when you're looking at prophecy, one of the neat things about this that maybe we should mention, maybe I shouldn't, but I don't know. But he who has ears, let him hear means listen to what he's saying, then be obedient and do it. For example, when Matthew's home, Matt, I need you to take the trash out. It's Monday night. And he says, sure, Dad, and continues to play a video game. Eventually, after 10 minutes, usually 5, I get frustrated because the garbage isn't out, so I get up and take the trash out. And then he'll look at me as I get upstairs with the trash bag and goes, I was going to do that when my game was over. He who has ears, let him do what the Father says. Now, I'm not just picking on Matt because he's gone. I'd use that illustration anyway. Those of you who can text him and say your dad picked on you in the sermon today so he doesn't feel left out. Now, as we look at this, I want us to look at the 7 letters, but I want us to see the reward in the 7 letters because some of it is just really, really cool. So let's start. The first letter we've got is Ephesus, the church at Ephesus. So let's look at verse 7. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Now, the tree of life in the paradise of God, this is an amazing picture of covenant relationship. Theologians have a term for the right relationship with God. It's called the garden relationship. Because in the Garden of Eden, everything was perfect. And again, I think that the best part of the Garden of Eden, and I would love, this would just be the best day ever. Okay? You've had a day, you've worked hard, you've done everything you needed to do, and in the evening, it's spring, you take a walk through the woods. And as you're walking through the woods, God comes up and starts walking beside you and says, how was your day? Hey, you see the deer over there? I have him. I made him, and he's watching. Isn't he beautiful? Look at this creek that's coming. I put this creek here, and the fish in it. All this I did because I love you. And I made this place perfect for you. Wouldn't that be an incredible, just to walk with God, just like you're hiking in the woods? That would just be amazing. That's what the Garden of Eden was all about. In the presence of God. But we know the story. The garden relationship was broken. God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, and he placed an angel at the entrance to the garden. My Old Testament survey class, I spend quite a bit of time talking about this. Then I ask this question at the end of class for discussion. I say, the angel at the entrance to the garden, barring them from going back into the garden. Punishment or blessing? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And very quickly, all the students say, oh, it's punishment because we're not in the garden anymore. We got kicked out. And I said, you missed the picture. I said, it's grace. Do you realize that angel barring us from the garden barred us from the tree of life? That if Adam and Eve had eaten from the tree of life, they would forever be separated from God. It would literally be hell on earth. But God put the angel so they could not eat from the tree of life, so that his plan of salvation could come into being, and that through the blood of Jesus and through a relationship with him and through the new covenant, that we would once again be able to eat from the tree of life and reestablish that perfect garden relationship. And then they look at me like you just did and go, oh, I get it. It's grace. But now, for those who are victorious, we get to have the garden relationship again. Now, through Jesus, that intimate relationship is forever. It's an eternal thing. And because we have been restored to God, we can now eat of the tree of life and spend eternity with him in heaven. You know what I call that? One beautiful carrot. That's almost like diamond type carrot, not a carrot you eat. That is beautiful. Second letter is the letter to Smyrna. Revelation 2, verses 10 and 11. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. 10 days. 10 days seems to be a period of time. And as we remember, we were getting into numerology. 10 doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning. So all we know is it's for some period of time the church is going to suffer persecution. Now, most people believe the church is going to be persecuted until Christ returns. Probably a good bet. But one of the things that I find amazing here is the understanding of the victor's crown, or the crown of life, as the reward for those who have been obedient and faithful regardless of the awful circumstances they face. Let me ad lib. This is one of the reasons I think Eldana Small is an amazing lady. All that she's been through in her life. And I'm not going to go into it, but she's had some battles. But she always smiles. She's always happy. She always tells you how blessed she is. And I'm thinking to myself, wow. And then you'll talk to her, and her first concern is about other people. Seems to me that she's got it figured out. That sense of the victor's crown, even in the midst of awful circumstances, even in the midst of persecution. Those who receive the crown are destined for victory with eternal life. The crown being participation in the sufferings and ultimate victory of Christ. Now, one of the things that I find amazing, because we realize that this book was written between 90 and 95. In the first century, the church developed this new habit. When a believer suffered persecution and was killed, they would bury them, and they'd go through the burial rituals, right? But what they started doing, those who died in the hands of persecution because of suffering, before they buried them, they would put a wreath of flowers on their head like a Roman victor's crown. And they would bury them with the victor's crown on their head. Now, those who were doing the persecution got to the point where they really didn't like that a whole lot. In fact, there's a story of one of the church fathers, a man named Polycarp, that when he was martyred for his faith, by the way, he was from Ephesus, okay? This is where John, he was one of the disciples of John the Apostle. And when he was killed and martyred for his faith, the Roman government not only killed him, but after he was dead, burned his body to ashes so there'd be no head to put a wreath on. Boy, did they mess up. They just didn't understand that it's not the wreath. It's eternity with God. And we know that Polycarp, upon his martyrdom, went to heaven because he was faithful and he was obedient in his relationship with Christ. And he received the crown that was promised. And he was not hurt at all by the second death. The first death, I'm guessing, probably hurt. But he was not separated from God, which is the second death. Third church, third letter, is a city that's just fun to say. Pergamum. Say it with me. Pergamum. Isn't that fun to say? Revelation 2:17. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. The hidden manna goes back to the reference of in the Exodus. In the wanderings in the desert, the people had no bread, no food to eat, and they started grumbling, and God said, okay. The next morning there was manna on the ground. It was like a bread that tasted like honey. And it was kind of, what did you say? Some say it was baklava, but probably you never know. But they were able to go and gather just enough for that day's provision. And the next day God would do it. And then on the sixth day they would get enough for 2 days, because on the seventh day you do no work. And a couple of them tried to take too much, and then it went bad. But the story is that they took some of that manna and placed it in a jar and put it in the Ark of the Covenant. And that was from then on known as the hidden manna. So now God is saying, for those who overcome, for those who are victorious, you get to eat from the relationship. Because the Ark of the Covenant, the top part of the Ark of the Covenant is called the mercy seat. It was the throne of God among his people. So you get to eat, you get to have your presence, your nourishment from the throne of God. That's pretty cool. But there's more to the story. Because also in the story, there is an allusion that the hidden manna is also a reference to communion. Oh. So that as we each week partake of the Lord's Supper, the little bread and the cup, that it is to be not only a reminder, but an encouragement. How many of you go through hard times during the week? How many of you find that if you miss church and miss communion, the next week's worse? I do. There's just something about that encouragement from communing with God that helps us get through the next week, does it not? It's like a prepaid phone. Okay? It's like, I'm not saying everything's going to go great, but when we commune with God, things go better. We're able to deal with things better. It's important. It's an encouragement. It's a reminder. That veiled reference to the Lord's Supper. We are also participating in the kingdom of God as we share communion. The hidden manna. And then he talks about a white stone with something written on it. What is the white stone? It's your ticket. What's the old song? I've got a ticket to ride. This is your admission to Six Flags. This is your admission. It says you get to come to heaven. This is what allows your entrance. Now, over the years, guess what happened? Certain churches would see this illustration and they'd say, well, to take communion, you need to have a token or a stone to show that never meant to be. But this white stone with a new name written on it gives us the opportunity. And It's that encouragement to know that when this is over, I get to be with him forever in heaven. It's another tool of encouragement. The next is Thyatira, verses 26 through 29 of chapter 2. To the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. That one will rule with an iron scepter and will dash them to pieces like pottery. Just as I have received authority from my Father, I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. In other words, the ones who don't compromise their convictions, the ones who don't offer sacrifice to any other god, including the emperor, they will reign with Christ. But to attain this, the person must persevere to the end. And this is a reference to Psalm 2. Excuse me. And ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possessions. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. This doesn't matter. What matters is being obedient to what God has called us to do. The morning star is reference to the immortality of the overcomer. As you overcome and as you deal with all the circumstances that are your way, all the struggles that are your way, and as you have been obedient and not compromised your convictions, in the end, you will live forever with God in eternity. Another beautiful carrot. The fifth is Sardis. Jump into chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Those who don't give in to the compromise will walk in white clothes, just as Jesus walks in white clothes. There's an episode of the TV show Modern Family where they're trying to take a picture. And some idea, they decided to dress everybody in white. Now, if you've ever been around children, you know white clothes don't stay that way. The little boy, Luke, is just hysterical. And they're trying to find a way to keep his clothes white. So they wrap him they put him in white clothes, then they get a big roll of cellophane and they wrap him up in it. And right before the picture, they cut the cellophane off so he's clean. Of course, in the show, then they throw mud at each other and all things work out the way they're supposed to. But here's the thing. When we compromise, we are soiling ourselves. When we're giving in, we're soiling ourselves. And it is through the blood of Christ that we are made pure. Have you ever tried to get blood out of a piece of clothing, like got cut and then, I remember one time, this was back in the days when ministers had to wear suits and white shirts. I cut my neck shaving and blood got on the collar. That white shirt was useless because I've never found a way to get blood out of anything. And I'm sure somebody's, Pinterest would have something, I'm sure. But one of the things that I've noticed in the reference in Scripture, his blood washes us white as snow. Through our relationship with him, we are pure. And if we don't compromise that relationship, we will walk as he does in white. White being the color of purity and of heavenly acceptance. The sixth church, the sixth letter, is Philadelphia. Not Pennsylvania, by the way. 12 and 13 say this: "The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Now, make you a pillar in the new temple. How many of you ever heard the saying, "This person's a pillar of the church"? They're making really sad reference to this. Now, what is happening in this is actually a reference to an Old Testament story found in the book of Isaiah. Eliakim was a priest. Okay? And Eliakim, as a priest, died. Because most people do die. And what his family did, because he was so attached to the temple and would not leave the temple, they took his body and hung it on a peg on a pillar in the temple. So there hung his dead body in the temple. All right? Now, this lasted until his family fell out of respect or out of favor. And then they ripped his body down and threw it in the trash. All right? So what John is saying is, you will always be in God's presence in the temple. No one's going to rip you down. You're never going to fall out of favor. Once you're in heaven, you're not going to leave heaven. When you're in heaven, when you're in God's presence, God's not going to get tired of your ugly mug and send you someplace else. You're not going to fall out of favor with God when we're in heaven because you have been victorious. Oh. So, the joy of this, once we're in heaven, there's no chance of you being removed. There's a carrot. Get through this, and then you'll forever be in my presence. It's an eternity. The last letter is the letter to Laodicea. Verses 21 and 22 say this: "To the one who is victorious I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." The promise of royal glory for those who triumph. Those who stand firm to the end will be saved. Those who stand by Christ in their trials, through his trials, will receive the kingdom. Those who suffer with Christ will reign with Christ. Those who triumph with Christ will rule with Christ during the millennium. Sitting on Christ's throne along with him symbolizes the regal splendor that is the believers in heaven. Would you rather hear all the stuff that the churches were doing wrong, or would you rather be encouraged? I'm a carrot kind of guy. And as I read through these 7 letters and the third part of the formula in each of the letters, I don't know about you, but I hear those and I see what God is promising us, and it just makes me want to be better. It makes me want to follow him and do what he's told me to do. It makes me want to be obedient. Do you look at these letters and think, not only in the end we win, and it's just really, really great. I know we've got our struggles. I realize we're not a perfect church. There is no perfect church. But if we are faithful and if we are obedient, we will be with him forever. Not because of anything we have done, but because our relationship with him through the blood of Christ. Wow. The only thing I left to say is this: he who has ears, let him hear. Would you pray with me?